We all have things in common with all species. And so how can we then find those similarities and reclaim some of those indigenous practices of being a part of that dance instead of really seeing ourselves as separate from it?
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hilda Labrada Gore. This is episode 141, and my guest is Doniga Markegard. Doniga is the author of Dawn Again, Tracking the Wisdom of the Wild. And she is a regenerative rancher that brings a perspective rooted in nature. What makes Doniga stand out to me is her background in wildlife tracking and permaculture. She has literally tracked alpha predators like wolves in the wild. I met Doniga on Joel Salatin's farm just a couple of months ago. She blew me away. We had a fascinating conversation. She speaks with passion, intelligence, and insight about the benefits of immersing ourselves in nature. Among other things, in today's conversation, she touches on how we all have a choice to live either a regenerative or a degenerative lifestyle. She talks about our relationship to the earth around us and how even the foods we eat impact our lifestyle and our health. You will be challenged in so many ways from this conversation. I know I was. And at the very least, it will certainly inspire you to get in touch with nature again, whatever that looks like for you, wherever you are. Before we get into the conversation, which was, by the way, recorded live on Polyface Farm in the Shenandoah Valley, we want to acknowledge our sponsors. The Wise Traditions Podcast is supported in part by the Weston A. Price Foundation. First and foremost, I want to tell you about our annual conference that's coming up in Baltimore in November. I want you to be there. It's all about transforming our health. Find out about the amazing offerings, the speakers, and the food at wisetraditions.org. Also, I have several live shows coming up just now in California. 2 are pinned down, and you're going to want to sign up right away. One is with Hillary Boynton of the Heal Your Gut Cookbook on Sunday, July 29th. It is called Calling All Lunch Ladies, Wise Traditions Podcast at Hersel Family Farm. This is going to be an amazing conversation in a beautiful setting with, of course, farm-fresh, Wise Traditions-friendly food on Sunday, July 29th. The next event is called the Pasadena Potluck and Podcast. It is celebrating the 100th monthly potluck meeting of the Pasadena chapter, which was established by Karen Volkening-Behagen. She is the founding chapter leader, and so we're getting together. I'm going to be interviewing Mark McAfee as part of the live podcast, as part of this huge celebration. So for either event, the one on July 29th or the one on July 31st, go to eventbrite.com and get your ticket right away, because these babies are going to go fast, like Wise Tradition sourdough hotcakes, I would venture to say. And Green Pasture Products. Green Pasture Products are inspired by the research of Dr. Weston A. Price. Traditional diets were much more rich in vitamins and nutrients than our diets today. This is why Green Pasture offers fermented cod liver oil, concentrated butter oil, and coconut oil in a variety of products and blends. Boost your health with wholesome, healthy Green Pasture products today. Go to greenpasture.org. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Doniga.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I wanted to kick things off with your story about how you were out with some friends, tracking and doing your wilderness thing, and some craziness happened. Tell us about that.
I was part of a group of maverick teenagers that for one reason or another, we did not quite fit into the industrial school model. We didn't quite want to sit in rows in a building that we couldn't even look out the windows and be part of that rat race of people going and working towards a career that maybe they didn't really feel passionate about. So if you read my book, Dawn Again, Tracking the Wisdom of the Wild, you'll hear about how I was a bit of a wild child and found my way to the wilderness and, had a very supportive mom who helped guide me towards that passion. And so the other teenagers in this wilderness immersion school in Western Washington also had their own sort of wild child story. So what better place to have us than in the middle of the wilderness, away from, sort of the troubles that teenagers can get into. So we got really, really passionate about just being out in nature, learning the language of nature through bird language and wildlife tracking. And part of the draw was to just stay out longer. So in order to be able to walk out into nature, into the wild, you don't want to have to pack a lot of gear. You want to be able to source your water from clean springs, or be able to build containers and boil your water. And you want to be able to gather wild edibles and hunt and gather your own food. You want to be able to build shelters to stay warm. You want to learn how to make fire by friction, because you don't always have matches or a lighter. So we learned all of those skills as a part of this school. And oftentimes we would be at school and we just say, hey, let's not go home. Let's just stay. And so we had our little primitive camp areas within a short walk of our central fire zone, which was really just a shelter over a fire. So we would go out, and that would allow us to explore farther areas into the wilderness. And I remember building this shelter. It was a beautiful wigwam shape with vine maple saplings that we had all worked together on. And it was close to a cattail swamp. Now, cattails are a wild food that give so much food and fiber and warmth and pollen and starch. I mean, it's really a superfood of wild food with so many different uses. And so it was springtime. Western Washington is very, very wet in the spring. So this wigwam was built in proximity to a cattail swamp for good reasons, because we would take the leaves of the cattail and we would weave them into mats that we would sleep on. So we would just sit by the swamp weaving and watching the wildlife, and we had all built our own mat to sleep on. And then we had a fire in the middle of the shelter, and once it was time to go to sleep, we would make sure that there was enough wood by each of our little sleeping areas that we could take turns stoking the fire at night so that we would stay warm, because we didn't have sleeping bags. We were, in a sense, just testing ourselves. We just, spur of the moment, oh yeah, let's sleep out in the wilderness tonight. And after a good meal of wild foods and roasting some cattails over the fire, which, by the way, are very, very nourishing. Yeah, I mean, talk about nutrient dense. Wild foods are incredible, because they're grown in the soils that are really ideal for that species. There's a reason why they grow in the areas they grow. They're not growing in a farm field that's been plowed and the soil depleted and the minerals depleted. So I would cook up a stir fry of cattails, and you would probably eat just a small portion of that compared to even organic celery that was grown in a tilled organic field. I mean, the minerals in the last 40 years, and you'd have to eat probably 4 to 5 times as many vegetables to get the kinds of minerals that you would get 40 years ago. And it's all because of the soil.
You have me on the edge of my seat, because here we are sitting at Joel Salatin's farm, here enjoying the breeze of the outdoors, the sense of nature. And so I'm getting the feel of what an idyllic youth you had, in that you could have this experience. But I get the feeling something crazy did happen on that night, overnight, when you were just kind of impromptu having that sleepover outside. So tell us what happened.
basically it was one of my classmates' turn to stoke that fire at night, and we woke up with the smell of cattail mats burning. So he had stoked it really big because he figured, if I stoke it really big, then I can actually get some sleep. Because as soon as the fire died down and it got cold, we just wake up shivering. So he stoked it really big. And of course, our cattail mats were on flames, and we all woke up and ran out of the wigwam and then got some water and put it out. So all these, beautiful mats that we spent so much time weaving were, partially charred. But good thing we were in Western Washington.
And I get the feeling maybe that's part of what the Wilderness Awareness School is about, like letting children explore, experiment, and learn lessons from the wild, right? I mean, that ended well, but you learn as you go.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so important to just let kids be wild and free. It's so sad because my generation, we're the last generation that remembers pre-screen time. And if I was born 10 years later, then it would be a completely different outcome. So I'm 37 now, and we never had screens. We didn't have the internet, and we had trails that connected the neighborhoods, and we had our little areas, our secret spots that we would go and we would explore, and we knew every inch of the woods around where we lived. For as long as I can remember, that was my playground. What better thing to do with your kids when, my mom was a single mom, is just, hey, go outside, go and explore, go hop on your horse. So it was really an idyllic upbringing, and I just don't see that anymore.
How did that form what you're doing today? Like, what did you do next? So here you are, a young person at this Wilderness Awareness School. You're having these experiences, you're exploring and learning. So what did you do when you grew up?
Well, I don't think I've ever grown up. I'm still a kid.
I love it.
Yeah. So my life has taken a lot of really amazing turns. I was a professional wildlife tracker. So I spent 7 summers in the middle of the Frank Church wilderness of no return in Idaho, tracking wolves. And it's so funny because just this morning I'm here at Polyface Farm in Virginia, and I see someone in the exhibitor booth displaying these beautiful handcrafted primitive bows and satchels and journals, and it's someone that I tracked wolves with in the middle of Idaho 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So I would just be out in the wilderness a lot, and I thought that maybe that would be my life. But then I had this awakening that I couldn't just passively observe nature and just watch the degeneration that I saw happening around me. I fell in love with grasslands. I fell in love with the interplay of predator and prey and the vibrancy that came when a wolf pack would go through an area and the elk would herd up and they would run to the next meadow and leave behind just this, their saliva and that scent and their wallows, and so much that I see now that I'm a regenerative rancher, that we as humans can take our place and we can mimic that just magical mystery of life. And as Joel says, life, death, decomposition, regeneration, life, death, decomposition, regeneration is this constant cycle that we are mimicking.
Now, some people say humans, we're interrupting this cycle somehow. Do you think that's true?
Oh, absolutely. And it's our choice. You can either live a degenerative life or a regenerative life. And I think a lot of that has to do with how you were raised and your experiences, your experiences in your life and what your senses take in. And we're finding that food has a lot to do with it, because your gut microbiome is directly linked to your brain and your ability to have clear thinking and lack of anxiety and depression and some of these other very, very common mental illnesses that we see today. And we're finding that that is linked to the food that you eat. So this life, you need to make a big shift, and it can start wherever you are. You don't have to live like me and go out in the middle of the wilderness and, go with a group of wild people and catch yourself on fire. But you can start with just changing your diet, and that can make a big impact.
Talk to us a little bit more about what that looks like. Like you said, we can either have a degenerative or a regenerative life. What does the degenerative life look like? And then what does the regenerative one look like?
Yeah, so the degenerative life looks like the standard American diet, standard American lifestyle. Our youth is up to 8 hours average screen time a day. And with that rise in screen time comes the rise of anxiety, depression, suicide. And the standard American diet is packed with processed and sugars and all those things that lead to an unhealthy gut microbiome. So the same thing that industrial agriculture is doing to the soil, that food that is being grown industrially and that is being consumed is having the same impact on the microbiome in our gut. So it's no different than how we're treating our soil, it's how we're treating our bodies.
And one thing that comes to my mind is the industrialized food is packaged and processed, as you said. And maybe the degenerative life is similarly, it's like you're in a package. You are in your home, and then you get in your car, which is another package that takes you to work, which is another building, which is a package. Do you see what I mean? And it's all very sterile and compartmentalized and lifeless. Now talk to us about the regenerative life and lifestyle. What does that look like?
I could go on and on about this in so many different avenues, all the way down to how we move our body and how we, as my friend Katie Bowman would say, how we have outsourced our movement and how we can stack our lives to reclaim some of that. So I'm here at Polyface, so that the examples coming up right now is that there's these young people that are taking a year of their life, and this year is going to be a year that will influence their decisions for the rest of their life and into the future generations. So they are reclaiming that early morning wake up and going out and using their bodies to do the chores, to feed and water the animals, to move the animals, to be part of this dance of nature and really immerse themselves in this and immerse themselves with all of the other diverse species that they are related to. We all have things in common with all species. And so how can we then find those similarities and reclaim some of those indigenous practices of being a part of that dance instead of really seeing ourselves as separate from it?
Coming up, Doniga talks about how the food that we eat affects us on every level and how starting her own kids on nutrient-dense foods help them be more in tune with their bodies and make good nutritional choices later in life. We want to pause now and recognize our sponsors, the Weston A. Price Foundation. We are committed to helping you and the world eat better. Please come and join us at our Wise Traditions Conference this fall in Baltimore, November 16th to the 18th. We will have all kinds of excellent speakers and tracks, like there's a whole track on farming, aging gracefully, cancer. There's just something for everybody. And you guys, it's not just the speakers, but it's really the community that you get to be a part of. I look forward to seeing these folks every year, and I meet fascinating, articulate health professionals, people on their journey. I just can't get over how amazing it is. So go to wisetraditions.org and sign up today. I want to meet you in person. And if you can't come out to Baltimore, maybe you can join me in California. I have 2 live podcast events coming up. One is with Hillary Boynton from the Heal Your Gut Cookbook on July 29th. And the other is with Mark McAfee at the celebration of the Pasadena chapter's 100th meeting. So just go to eventbrite.com and look up both of these events. I'll give you the specific title so you can find them. One is called Calling All Lunch Ladies, Wise Traditions Podcast at Herschel Family Farm, and the other is called Pasadena Potluck and Podcast. Get your tickets soon. These are going to sell out quickly. I'm trying to nail down a third event, and if I can, I hope to see you at one of these in California this July. And Green Pasture Products. Green Pasture sells a variety of products to boost your health. Organic virgin coconut oil, virgin coconut ghee, skincare balms, and more. Their fermented cod liver oil comes from the prolonged soaking of wild cod livers in brine, which allows cod livers to naturally ferment. It's a gentle process compared to that used by most highly industrialized cod liver oil manufacturers. Personally, I take their cod liver oil daily, and I rarely get sick. I am so thankful for Green Pasture's thoughtful, traditional practices and products. Go to greenpasture.org and place your order today. Talk to us about food and how that plays a part in all of this. You were telling me earlier that on some of your wildlife adventures, you would just eat sandwiches or whatever. And that was in stark contrast to some food that you had from Peter on this wolf tracking adventure. It was something quite different. So talk to us about even your own experience with food and how you've evolved in that kind of thinking.
Because I was part of this wilderness culture and different people from different backgrounds would come in, I was just reminiscing with Peter about how when he came and he would cook for the camp, he has a very, sort of wise traditions sort of background. It just real food. And it was also like based on the elements of fire, water, air, mineral, and it was different than what I was used to, because I was used to just like, okay, yeah, put some peanut butter on a slab of bread and throw it in your pocket and get on the trail kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so he would have, broths in the morning and, these beautiful, these beautiful wraps that we would make up and take on the trail with us. And I loved it. I mean, it just gave me so much energy. And my mom also just raised us with real food and food from our garden. But these people that I would come across opened me up to how food can impact us in all the parts of a human, all the parts that we have, our physical bodies, emotional state. I would start to notice like certain foods would cause certain emotions to come up. And, even our taste buds and our senses are causing that emotional body. Our mental state of mind, foods impact our mental state of mind, and also our spiritually. Having that relationship with food is part of our spiritual being. So that really opened my eyes up to that my future had to be something with food. And so I went and studied permaculture, and that's what brought me to California. Was I studied with Penny Livingston of the Regenerative Design Institute. So I'm immersed in permaculture. I immersed in holistic management, and then through serendipity found my husband, who's a 6th-generation cattle rancher. So I landed on a cattle ranch, and now we produce nutrient-dense foods for thousands of families all across the San Francisco Bay Area.
And is that what your own family eats as well? What does the regenerative lifestyle diet look like on your table?
Food has become such a passion of mine because we eat every day and we cook every day. And why not just make it juicy and fun and interesting? And so I think my next book is going to have something to do with food as a lifestyle and as recreation and as fun and as movement. So yeah, food for our family is the center of our family. I mean, we eat together. At least every dinner, we are all gathered around an incredible meal. And I have to boast that my kids just love everything I cook. Oh. It doesn't seem to matter what I cook. They just crave mom's cooking, and it just brings me so much joy. And I love just everything about it. I love sourcing the food. We have friends around us that grow wonderful mineral rich organic vegetables on really good soils that we also graze our animals on, the cover crop. So it's a full cycle. Our animals are providing nutrition to the soils through grazing their cover crop, and then in turn those plants that are coming from the soil soils are nourishing our bodies. And so I cook with broth a lot. I mean, that adds so much flavor. I milk cows, but I realize that for my quality of life, we do 6 month on, 6 month off milking. And so we typically fast from dairy for the winter months for the most part. I mean, we still can't get away from our butter and cream and stuff. But, and then we're just full of just beautiful raw Jersey and Guernsey milk for 6 months out of the year. But I used to milk year round, and you have to think about your quality of life. I love that time in the morning milking, and I also love the break of not having that time just with the cows in the morning, maybe that time with the kids or that time by myself. So yeah, and then we raise grass-fed beef, grass-fed lamb, pasture-raised pork, pasture-raised chickens. Well, our pork are mostly raised in the forest now. And then we do the raw milk half the year. And I can't eat any other food that's not raised in a regenerative way. It's just the difference is so huge on all of those 4 parts of the human that I described before.
Well, I love hearing this because I think sometimes parents are concerned, for example, how do I keep my kid away from the gummy bears at the next birthday party? Well, if you feed them nourishing, juicy, amazing food, those gummy bears are going to have less appeal, don't you think?
Yeah, and we've sort of made a shift in our family just because of a lot of the research we've done, and we want to be really healthy. And so it started with my husband. He just absolutely no processed sugar. And then, the other members of our family have come on board with that. And, once in a while the kids slip up, but for the most part, we do other things because it is tempting and it is tough when they go to a birthday party, not to indulge in the cake, but they know the consequences. They are aware enough of their body that they know when they eat sugar, there's going to be a consequence. They're going to have a tummy ache. So we have another sort of system that we do. It's like, oh, okay, well, you missed that treat at a birthday. Well, why don't you make your really yummy, sugar-free nut cocoa powder ball, cookies that you make, and it will have it a fun thing, and you can have that and not have the consequence of the tummy ache. And I think when my kids were really little, I just told them they were allergic to food coloring. I mean, I think, maybe they'll listen to this and say, oh, but, I think everybody's allergic to food coloring, so I can kind of justify that.
Yes. I've told friends of mine, just imagine that you're allergic to sugar, because then it's not an option. You're just like, no, I can't have that, But going back to your children, you were talking earlier today about schooling and how being inside a room, having to sit at a desk, not being allowed to look outside, like how that's not really the kind of education you wanted. What kind of education are your children getting? Are they in a regular school, or are you teaching them at home, or what?
They do go to a very small public school part-time because they love it. And they have wonderful teachers, and it's surrounded by redwood trees and meadows, and they have giant windows they can look out of. And they also part-time homeschool and do wilderness training. And, they're on the ranch. They live it. So, we're out on horseback. We have 10,000 acres of rangeland that we lease in the coastal San Francisco Bay Area. So they have access to unlimited species diversity and tracking and lakes and just, beautiful places to explore.
You mentioned tracking. I want to go back and learn a little bit more about what it was like for you to track wolves. I can't even imagine. How does a person start with that? Just out of curiosity.
Any large predator that you track is going to teach you about the entire ecosystem. So focusing on that apex predator, like the mountain lion or the wolf, is going to put you right in it. The wolves in particular, there's been a number of studies on the tritrophic cascade. So when wolves come into an area, then all of a sudden the prey species, their population starts to become more in balance. They're going after the weak or the old. And then in turn, the plants, the riparian areas start to come back because the pack of wolves are moving those prey species. So the riparian areas begin to recover. The songbirds come back, more beaver activity comes back. And then in turn, the soils are healthier because soils thrive when there's diverse plants. Without green growing plants and photosynthesis that incredibly converts sunlight into simple sugars that feed the entire rhizosphere under our feet. Without that, we wouldn't have life. So I would say learning from the predators eventually brings you all the way down to the soil.
Beautiful. And when you're talking about the soil, it really is going to resonate with our listeners. It resonates with me because we've talked to Alan Savory and other soil experts who help us understand this whole choreography, as Joel Salatin puts it, right? Of the animals and the plants and the soil and our health, how it's all tied together. Well, so now I need to tie this interview together, and I want to conclude by asking you the question I often ask my guests. If the listener could do one thing to improve their health, Doniga, what would you recommend that they do?
I would say spend more time observing nature and being part of the language of nature and taking your place as an integral member of life instead of seeing yourself as separate from life. And then from there, your choices may be different.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
My guest today was Doniga Markegard. To connect with Doniga, go to markegardfamily.com or follow her on Instagram at DonAgain. For the show notes and highlights from today's episode with links to resources that we mentioned, just go to our website, westinaprice.org, and look for the show notes for episode 141. And if you're enjoying this podcast, go ahead and subscribe through Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a thing. You can rate and review us on iTunes as well. Every review lets people know that this show is worth listening to. Thank you in advance for your help with that. Next week, everybody, we talk with Sally Fallon-Morell about Wise Traditions Principle number 11, how every traditional culture made provision for future generations. What does that look like today? How do we increase our fertility and ensure the health of our baby before it's even born? And how do we make sure it is healthy its entire life? It's a fascinating conversation that touches on the answers to those questions, and it's particularly important for those in their childbearing years, for both men and women. So do stay tuned. Hey, and finally, thank you to Podcast Village, to Rob Ford, Rob Spiewak, and the team of interns who help us with the show week after week. Cynthia Castro-Cohen-Enriquez, Joy de los Santos, Deirdre Beard, Diva Rizvi, Melanie Ahern, Mary Hine, Cheryl Huftelin, and Olga de Villiers. I love and appreciate each and every one of you. Our listening team includes Heather Carpentier and Victor Coseto. Amy Marvin helps us with transcriptions. Last but not least, everybody, give me your feedback. Let me know what you thought of today's episode, or give me ideas for future shows. I'm totally open. Follow me on Twitter at Holistic Hilda. I'm on Instagram at Holistic_Hilda, or just go to my website, holistichilda.com, so I can support you on your wellness or podcasting journey. By the way, I do have a podcasting book coming out this summer. It's called Podcasting Made Simple. So if you are a health professional or someone who wants to reach more people with your message, you want to check out this book. It's going to be fantastic. I really break it down in 7 simple steps that I think everyone can benefit from. So if you want the inside scoop on when that book is going to be released, follow me, go to my website, holistichilda.com, and sign up for my e-newsletter, and I'll keep you in the loop. Thanks for listening, everybody. Stay tuned.
Did you know that there are Weston A. Price Foundation chapters all over the U.S. and around the world? Chapter leaders help you find good food in your area, and some have meetings you can attend. Go to our website, westinaprice.org, and click on Find a Local Chapter to see if there is one near you. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.